welcome to week 9. The attrition rate the last 2 weeks has been bad. So we've gone from a lot of people attending class. I know India, you guys had Diwali and stuff last week, so you're excused. But the attendance and stuff really went down, even the amount of people that wrote the review quiz. So it went down to 6 people from 10 the previous week, and the highest was 90%. So this week nobody got 100%. I think it was at question 1. Let's see, it's 16.1667%. So I think it's one person actually had it right. So I'm not going to go through all the other ones because most of the other ones are on the 66% or higher. So I'm just going to look at the 16% question. And I think even if you guys don't necessarily attend the class, try and write the review quiz. 10 or 20 or 30% is definitely better than getting a 0 for not writing. And I think it's also important that you sort of go through that quiz process, to start thinking about the stuff we covered this week or whichever week, just to start thinking about what type of questions can be asked. Because as you're going through reading the stuff and actually preparing for class or for the reviews, it's sort of important that you'll see what type of questions are asked, and you sort of start getting into, as you're going through the content, it's like, well, they might ask this or they might ask that. All right, so let's go. Yeah. So you can see most of the other questions. Oh, there's actually a 50% question. I'll look at the 50% question as well. How's it, Donald? I missed that one. So this question is looking at the flash type and how it relates to queries. So it's actually a bit from last week's or the previous week when you looked at JPA query or normal JPA queries in general. And there was actually a bit in the specification and a whole section about it in the book. So the question is, if the flash mode on the entity manager is set to auto, so you can set it on the entity manager or you can set it specifically on the query, as well, so your query or type query. Which of the following correctly describes the behavior of a JPA query that does not have its flash mode set when it is executed within a transaction? So there's a few things in here such as it's been set on the entity manager, not on the query. So the behavior that's going to happen is if it's not set on the query, it's going to use whatever behavior set in the entity manager. And the default is also auto. So if it's not set, it's going to be auto. And it's also being executed within a transaction. So if it wasn't within a transaction, the flash mode doesn't actually matter. So if you look at the different options, the first one is if the result set of the query contains entities that have been updated in the persistent context in the same transaction, those entities may not contain the updates. So this is pretty much the opposite of what we want to achieve with the flash mode of auto. So if you remember what the flash mode does, and this is from when we looked at the entity manager as well, it actually synchronizes whatever is in the database with the persistent context, and vice versa. So it's whatever is part of that persistent context, everything will have the same data in it. So that's what the flash mode does. So whichever way the provider does that, it doesn't necessarily need to write it to the database. It can keep it in memory and maybe write it to the database later, or whichever way it's doing it. But it just needs to make sure that those things are in sync. So it says the first one is actually the opposite of what we're going to do. It says any updates done to the entities in the persistent context prior to the execution of the query will be flushed to the database. So it could be, but it depends on the implementation of the provider. So the specification actually doesn't say how this needs to be implemented. It just says they need to be put back into sync. Next one is the query should be executed after calling flush. So this one does actually say we have to call flush. So this happens, you have to call flush if you've actually set your flush type to commit. So when you set it to auto, you're pretty much telling your provider, listen, yeah, I want you to keep the things instead. If you're saying it's setting it as commit, it means you only want to flush it when you commit your transaction or when you actually call flush. So this third one option is actually, once again, sort of the opposite of what we want to do because it's set to auto. And then the third one is the outcome depends on whether the query is a query or a type query. This doesn't actually matter. Like I said, type query is just the specialization of a query anyway. So the correct answer is none of the above is correct. So it's sort of one of those questions which is related to something in a different section, but it's applying it to the query. So this sort of goes back to, although it's part of the JPQL type questions, it relates back to the query stuff we did 2 weeks ago, and also looking back at the entity manager we did like in the 3rd week or the 4th week, I can't remember, and sort of bringing all those things back together. If you want to see a bit more information about that, so in the actual spec there's a section 3.87 which actually specifies queries on Flush and actually explains all of that in a bit more in an abbreviated way. And actually here's one of the sentences: the persistence provider implementation may achieve this by flushing the entities of the database or by some other means. So you can see, so the specification doesn't actually say how this flushing should work, how it should get it in sync. There's also in Chapter 7, which is from 2 weeks ago, a whole section on queries and uncommitted changes explaining how the flush type works. So you can also go and read through that. So this is sort of one of those types of questions I think, unless you do the mock exams, you're probably going to miss this. That's sort of what I've sort of seen sometimes with some of the other Java certification exams. So one of those things you maybe just you read over it, and you're going to expect some other code question about it. But this wasn't a code question. This was sort of a pulling all the strings together and sort of seeing what the answers at the end. And so if you only pick up from doing the mock exams. So let's look at question 50 here. This is which of the following statements is true? Excuse me. So any, all, and some expressions are used only with a subquery. Could be true. In and not in expressions are only used in a subquery. Could be true. So the member of is used for collections, and the in and not in is used in collections. So I'll say those two are the correct ones, and I'm correct. So it's sort of understanding these aggregate functions, whether aggregate or scalar functions, and where they're being used. So the in and not in, like I says, collection ones, and the member one's also a collection one. Where they exist, and all, or some of those, we sort of do your query, and depending on the type of result it brings back, you can see what that is. All right, so that was question, let's see, 8. Let's add it to, yes, it was question 8, so that was a 50%. That one. Right, so only 6 people wrote this weekend. That's very little. So hopefully you'll have more people, because I don't think anybody from India wrote. So India, all of you need to write this weekend, once you get the numbers back up there. Okay, so I accepted in 2 exam objectives this week. So the first one, you're looking at the criteria API. So that's sort of the different way of doing your queries. Also, you looked at JPQL, so this is a different way of doing it. We're also going to be looking at the JPA and how you use it in servlets and beans. Although we've actually looked at that before, but so I'm just going to sort of glance over it again. So looking at the criteria queries, we're going to be looking at the difference between criteria query and the JPA, JPQL. I'm not going to spend much time, I've just got one sort of slide on that. We're going to look at the meta model approach to querying, which is like very verbose, and then looking at actually creating API queries. I'm going to do things in a bit of a different way. I'll do the meta model stuff at the end, because I think it makes more sense to look at the criteria query first before looking at the meta model stuff. So looking at the difference between stuff that the criteria API and the JPQL, both are used to construct your queries. So it's not like criteria query is a different way of executing queries, both just used to construct it. So JPQL, you're actually using strings. With your criteria query, you're going to be using objects. And then your criteria query, because it's not just a string you're using there, you're actually using objects. It could be a bit more lines of code, also depending how you could chain things together, but it's a bit more, sort of say, work. Both of them still relate to your, come up from Entity Manager, which is like the door to your persistence context. And at the end, both are going to give you a typed query interface, which you can then use from there to go and execute it. So we just look at the 2 examples. So looking at our normal JPQL, you can see we're using a string there. Pretty simple and straightforward. Looks like SQL. Looking at our criteria builder, we've still got to first get a builder there. From a builder, we create a criteria query, build up our query, and then we only get to the stage where we create our query. So getting to this stage here, we get our C. which is our criteria query is the same as a little string we set up there. So that's how they are the same. So first off, let's start with the building blocks of the criteria API, and actually I wanted to move these way different. So you see both of to start with your criteria API queries, you have to start with criteria builder. So that's sort of the main thing you start out with. And from here you get your criteria query interface. So looking at the differences, your criteria query interface is the object which you're going to use to do all your from, your selects, your where, your order by, your having, your group by, distinct subquery, those type of, I'm going to call them SQL clauses in a way, so that you're using to construct your query. All of them are going to come from your criteria query. And then your criteria builder is where you're going to use all your things to sort of build up aggregates, predicates, which you're going to use for your where clauses, scalar functions, normal functions that you can call the database, your parameters. So that's used to go and build all those little bits up. So when looking at the criteria query, just keep this in mind, where what you're going to use a criteria builder for and what you're going to use a criteria query for. So getting back to, so your criteria builder is your main thing for building things and creating them. So if you do something like a select, you're not actually creating anything, you're sort of setting it. But if you want to use a parameter, you're going to create it from your criteria builder. If you want to do a predicate, you're going to create it from your criteria builder. Then once you get your criteria builder, you go and create your criteria query from there, and there's 3 different criteria queries you can create. So the first one is a type query, which actually tells I want this specific class. You can do one of outer class, which is just going to return an object. And you can also use tuples. So last week I sort of showed you tuples. You can also do a create tuple query, which will eventually get you to a type query of type tuple. The main thing is, like I said, this create query doesn't return an actual query or type query. This is not what you're going to use to go and get results or get a list or anything from it. That's what you're going to use to actually pass into your create query later on. One important thing, most of the stuff you do with create query is immutable, meaning that once you've set the state of that object, you can't go and change it. So if you've set your select statement, you can't go and change that specific select statement. If it's like strings, you're actually going to go and override it or actually going to destroy it before creating it. So you can't go and do a select and then add to your select. You have to recreate your select. Or you can't do a where clause and then go and add to your where clause later on. You actually have to recreate your where clause. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Reason for doing that is that, and we'll see when I show you the demo, so you can do sort of a bit of a chaining type pattern there. So select dot where dot order by dot having or group by dot having. You can do sort of that type of programming. And because it's also immutable, pretty much all your criteria query things are going to, and most of the stuff around your criteria API is going to take parameters. And there's very few, actually none I can think of, methods that you're going to be able to just say, boom, just call the method without actually passing in a parameter. So I says, as we're going through this, is of keep this picture in mind. Criteria builder, using to build stuff. Criteria query, using to sort of create and update your query. So I'm going to do some live coding today, a bit more than normal. I'll that one. All right, so let's get to presentation mode. So the first one we're going to be looking at is just sort of getting started with your criteria query. As I said, for this we can first create our criteria builder, and we get this from our entity manager. Like most things, we start from the entity manager. That's manager get criteria builder. So like most things with the JPA, you're going to start from our entity manager. That's sort of the doorway into your persistence context. And then from our criteria builder, we're going to create a criteria query. And this first one, we're just going to say it's our normal employee. And we're going to create this from our criteria builder. And so you can see there's three different criteria query. Create query, the one you actually pass to the class in, or the one you say tuple. The delete and updates are part of the JPA 2.1 spec, so for 2 you don't need to know how these work. You can go and read in the book about how they work. All right, so we're going to do create query there. And so we're going to create an employee class query. And that's it. So those are the 2 lines of code you need to create to start with a criteria query. Right. So before we go further, there's sort of the two main aspects I'd sort of call it you need to know about criteria queries is the query roots and expressions. So the one is sort of telling your query where to get its data from, which entities to get it from, and the second one, the path expressions, is what data you want from these entities. And this is sort of, I think, sort of, if you relate the entity, the roots, what they call sort of the roots, back to your identification variable from the JPQL. So if you cast your mind back like a week ago, and the long ago, we did sort of a from employee E, where that E was our identification variable. So a root is the same as our identification variable. So we're going to sort of almost say the same thing. So instead of doing a from employee and getting a E as identification variable, we're going to say from a criteria query, we're going to do a from, and we're actually going to say which entity class you're going to get it from. And that's going to return a root for us. So the same way you'll use your E dot name or E dot whatever further, and you'll do an employee dot get. So that root interface it returns there. It's almost like a root interface. Like it's the mean method or the mean object in the criteria query API. It's a root. That's sort of the way you're going to do your joins from there. You're going to do your path expressions from there. One thing to keep in mind here is that this from method is additive. Like I said, the criteria query, most of its methods are immutable, so you can't actually go and replace anything you're from. You can't go and get the same one again. So every time you call from, it's going to return a new instance of this employee root object, but it's also going to be additive. So every time you're going to call from, it's going to add to it. So if you're going to do C from employee class and do it again later, it's actually going to create a Cartesian product for you between the employee tables. So you're going to have an employee tables with each employee linked to each other employee. So in the big table, that can be big. It's almost like once you go Cartesian, you don't go back. So that's the one thing with the roots. And then your path expression, same way as our JPQL, we will do something like we've got our E, which is our identification variable, which is equal to our root. We say e.address.city is equal to got you New York. The same way you can do it. You can do that path expression with your query root. So instead of doing E dot, we're going to do employee dot get. So the dot relates back to a dot get here, and your E is just your whatever you called your query root there. In the same way, you're going to say we want address, a string of address, and we want to do the city in there. Dot get city is equal to New York. So if you sort of understand these two concepts between the root being equal to identification variable and your path expression of using your dot, you're just doing a dot get. And there's a different form of dot get as well, which we'll look at just now. Dot get, yeah. So it's sort of, because it's immutable and all that, it just strings it all together. So there's a lot of, with a criteria variable, there's a lot of these sort of chaining type queries. There's actually an anti-pattern, the dot notation. Well, some people think it's an anti-pattern. So it's going back to our demo. I keep going back to the wrong one. So I should have called this criteria query on employee. So getting back to our query here, so first thing we want to do is we want to set up our root. So we did a from there. We're going to have a root of employee. Let's call this employee root. And that's equal to, so from our criteria query, so let's say because we're building up our select statement, our actual query, we're not adding to it, not doing aggregates or parameters, we use criteria query dot from, and I'm going to say we want to select from our employee dot class. And so on. So there we've got our identification variable, like our E little thing. Now I'm going to select from it. So once again, our criteria query dot select. And we're going to say we want to select our employee root from there. The same as we did our normal. So if we've got the JPQL SQL, so the same select we're doing this, select E from employee, is what we've just done here. So root employee is where we did our E from, so that getting our employee root is where you get our E from, and then our select, our E is the same as we did there. So you can see it's sort of, as you relate the two together, it's quite simple. And so you can also do your path, so if I do a dot get there, dot get, and I want to say I want to get my employee name. You'll see there's complaints because it's not the same type, so we'll look now at why it doesn't like me doing it like that. Let's just do employee root. So if we go and run this query, run. It's running. Oh yeah, that's right. If you can run this, this will just return a list of all our employees in the database. I'm using the same database as last week. As you can see, it's just doing a list of all our employees. Okay.
The one South African names, British names.
I'm not going to rewrite all those queries. I'm just going to use what they've given me. It's one of the things. If you're a good programmer, you're lazy. You reuse as much as possible.
Amen.
So looking at our select clause. Sort of look at it quickly there. So our select clause you get from a criteria query. And the one thing that's important, and that I sort of say, is that whatever is in your... Don't worry. So maybe more people listen. Like it'll be like a Where's Wally type moment, like when did Donald sneeze? And you can send in your answers. Get 2 extra points on your review quiz. So the important thing is that whatever you do in your select clause, whatever objects you're returning from your select clause, your type, that needs to be the same thing that you said when you do your create your query. So if we're going to return our employee like we did previously, we have to say employee.class. If we're going to return a string, we're going to have to actually, so like the employee name, we have to say create query.string.class. You can also return multiple objects from your select statement. So just like an employee or the employee's name or a project, you can return the employee's name, his age, his salary. And there's 3 ways of doing that. You can, from a criteria builder, you can do a tuple, a constructor, or an array type object. Just looking at our select here, you can say instead of saying select whatever, you can do a tuple and then say what you want to return as a tuple. There's also a synonym to your select, which is the multi-select. And that creates a tuple for you, if I remember correctly. So instead of actually doing a tuple with our 2 parameters in there, our 2 path expressions, we can actually just say do a select and just return it straight like that. You can also use aliases in your select, although from a criteria query point of view, it doesn't necessarily make sense, but they say if you're using tuples, you've got named tuples there. So instead of saying get 0, get 1, using your tuple types, you actually can say get full name or get ID, whatever you call them. Then looking at the from clause, that's how you get your root from there, and then on your joins, you can join on that root. So you use your join method from your root, and then you can also give it a type. The default type, once again, is inner join. You can also do a left join, which is an outer join. I don't know why they just call it inner and outer.
Probably trademark some big database.
Yeah, so instead of a left.
Probably trademark Oracle.
It's like your navel. It's the innie or an outie. So when you do a join, and the join is once again like your root, where it's going to return your type. If you want to use it later, you actually have to keep track of that thing. So if you're going to do a join again, it's going to join it again to it. And it's going to return a join type for you, which is a generic with 2 types in there. So your first type is your source, which will be your source table, employee in this case, and then your type you're joining to, which is your project. So if you're going to join our projects on there, we're going to do employee that one side and a project on the other side. You can do a join type left as a second parameter. If you leave it out, it's going to be default inner. We looked at maps like 3 weeks ago. If you want to join on a map, you can do join map. Works a bit different. And you can also do a fetch join. As with the JPQL, it doesn't do an eager loading of any of the types you join. It does a lazy load. So if you're actually going to use that relationship or something in that relationship at a later stage, you can do an eager one with a fetch on there. The important thing though is the fetch doesn't return a root or a join. It just returns a fetch type. You don't know what to do with that fetch type, but it's not going to return a root or a join. So you can't do a fetch and then...
What's the word?
Does it? Fetch. Okay, so let's go and look at some selects and some joins. Let's do this one as well. So we've seen that we've got our root and query and select there. So we want to say, looking at our select statement, selecting the path. going to do our criteria query here. So we're going to do a tab. We're going to do our select statement. I just want to select names. The main things, like I said, when you do a select, we want to, when you create our query, you want to say what type you're going to be selecting. So we're going to be selecting a string here. So even though our root is an employee, we're not going to be selecting the employee. We're going to be selecting the employee's name. Criteria select. So employee dot get. We're going to say we want to get the name. But this is just going to return an object, and we're saying we want a string here. So to get the right type here, once again, we jump to generics, and we can say we're going to return a string here. So it's got this little generic type thing here. So the actual type that you're going to be returning from your select statement, you can make a generic. So if it was like a little path expression department, blah, 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 dot name, you don't have to go and cast the department, use generics, and then you just have to do it on the department name.
Most developers, when they see generics, method freak out.
You need to get used. If you're going to start using
generics
is coming big time in Java 9, man. So
yeah, and my pet peeve is that it's like generics and lambdas are like mental blocks.
yeah,
That people see them and just freak out.
yeah. But it's go and do .NET for like 2 years, and then you'll be over it, man. You'll get back to Java and you'll be like, where's my generics and my lambdas? I need my fix. I need my dot notations. I need to pass my delegates in everywhere. That sounds dirty as well. It's like a Charlie Sheen. No, that's too early.
It's not funny now.
No, that's not. It's just leave it there. So you can get your path back there, and then looking at our join. So once again, we've got our root there. So we want to go and join our projects relationship. We're going to join that in. So we're going to get our join type back, which is a generic once again. First type is our root type, which is employee, and then our second type is the type we're joining to, which is project. Let's call this a join, project join. And we're going to join from our root, so we're going to say employee root, join. And the important thing here is we're going to tell it which attribute we're joining on our root, not the type. So attribute is project. So this isn't your entity type you're joining on. Entity type we've specified there. This is the attribute on our employee entity that we're joining to. So I just want to open this up. So if we go to employee, project is there. So it's actually projects, not project. Project, so that's the attribute you're joining on there. So if we go and run this, we should see a list of employee names, or not. Where is this for? Oh, I should probably select. All right, so we want to left it hanging there. So on our criteria query, this one is selected, and we want to select our P, which is our projects. So what's equal to our P? That's all. That's so. What's equal to this? What's equal to this join is our project join. We don't have any standards, so we don't have to go and beep that out.
You can go and edit the YouTube. Everything live just came out.
Yeah. See, so that's why people who watch the YouTube video should watch it live, because we might start editing these moments out. Let's just run it again, and let me select the project join this time. So it's our first one, selecting all our names, and the second one, selecting all the projects there. Okay, so let's get into the next bit, which is our where clause. So there's a whole section in the book about the where clause. I'm not going to go in every specific one. Main thing is when you're doing a where clause, you either can take a predicate or an expression that's Boolean. So when an expression is your path expression. So if that path expression is a Boolean type, you can just pass it straight in there. So I wonder if that employee has one. Let's see. So if we go to employee, it doesn't have a Boolean. So if it's an employee type here that maybe was a Boolean, like private Boolean is working, so you can pass that in as a path expression. So that's what they mean by expression with a Boolean. or a predicate. So your predicates is all your equal to, not equal to, exists in, all that type of functions. The important thing, like I said, because the criteria query is immutable, every time you're going to call your where clause, whatever was in your where clause previously is going to be wiped clean, and your new things are going to be put in. So it cleans the slate every time. So you can't go and add all your, go call where like 10 times and add something to it every time. You're going to have to get all your predicates together and then pass them in either as a list, or actually as an array, or you have to go and pass them in as an array, yeah, or as an array or a perimeter list. And it's stuff like your equal to and your not that are, and ors and stuff that return predicates. And there's also a little shortcut. So if all your predicates are going to be returning trues and falses, you can actually do a conjunction or a disjunction. So true or falses.
That's what my teachers told me I am. Disjunctional.
Disjunctional youth. Then the other thing is if you want to use perimeters, in your where clause you have to build a perimeter expression. And once again we do that with a criteria builder, yeah. Why does it sounded wrong for a moment? The criteria builder. And you have to actually give it a type. So when you're doing your, so criteria query builders uses a lot of generics. So when you build our expression, we actually have to tell it what type of perimeter. Is it a string, a long, a double, an int, or a specific entity type? So if you tell it what type it is, and then set it up and give it a name. And then in our where clause, instead of putting a string in there where something's equal, actually going to say where something is equal to our perimeter. And then we can do our set perimeter like normal later on. So it only uses the name perimeters, so not the positional perimeters. The okay, from JPQL with a little question mark 1, question mark 2 doesn't do that. You can also do subqueries. So a subquery is a specialization of your query. So once you've set up your subquery, you can do your routes from there, your where, your select, your where, your order by, all that. Not an order by, you can't do an order by in a subquery. Your wheres and your group by and havings and stuff like that on your subqueries. So let's go and do some where clauses. So where clauses. That's going to be that one, that one, that one. That's 4. All right, so this first one we're going to do select the name of the employees from our employee entities where they work in the QA department. Actually, so IntelliJ actually puts your little generics in there, but then it does like the little squiggly, which is it's the derived one. It's just derive it. You can just leave it out, but IntelliJ actually puts it in for you. Interesting. All right, so you can see we're already selecting our name here, but now we want to do our where clause there. So you can either chain it on, so you can either do a where there. Why not keep putting my caps lock on? Where you can chain it back. No, I just want to scream the code out. Where are the QAs? No, so criteria query, not builder, but where. So you can either chain it on or so on. I guess now we want to do our predicate here. So we want to do a criteria builder that equals, and then we want to say equal to what? So our department equal to QA. So where do I get a department name from? It's from e dot, so it'll be our employee root. Employee root dot get. Not get class. Get. We want to get our department. For department, you want to get the name, and we want this to be equal to QA. What comes as off method? Wrong place. Be there. There. All right. So we're saying that we want our eDepartment.get name equal to QA, and we're selecting the names there. So that's how we'll set that up. And going a bit further, so the other thing is when you do our where, like I said, we have to pass a predicate in. So we get that from our equals to. Then if you want to do a bit more, so you actually want to do an also, you want to do a employee equal to it and our names equal to it. Doing an also, you can do, like I said, you can do your criteria, your predicates outside of your where clause. So you actually go and build them up outside here. So say predicate. And just check out predicates in different namespaces. Make sure you use the one that's in your JPA namespace. So predicate, we say QA department.
Guava expression also.
Yeah.
Root guava.
Yeah. So that it's a predicate means it's a function that you're passing in.
Well, we're around a long time.
So once again, is a criteria builder equal. So I'm actually just going to copy this top one. Go lazy developer. So we can set up like that, but you said I want two predicates here. Let's just shortcut key, duplicate that one, and we say the salary bigger than 55,000. So this is a salary, and instead of doing it equal, we're going to do a greater or equal to. You can do greater or equal to, like that, or there's a GE little shortcut. You don't want to type that much, because who needs auto-completion? So this is probably those people who use Vim and in Emacs.
Entities have been around before these fancy IDEs. I don't know about the criteria query, but...
Yeah, so from here, when I say we're going to get our salary, you're going to use string, you don't have to cast the stuff in here, but because we are doing a salary, which is a long, this is a long, is a long, we just want to cast this to a long, and if you've done your JPA, your professional programmers, you have to pass the class type of long in there. You can't pass the primitive type in. This is greater or equal to 55,000, which is a long. Pass that in. So to get that into our where clause, we want to do an or. We do a criteria query, but where, and now you want to do an or. So once again, criteria builder. But we do an or between these two, and then we just pass them in. Or between this one and then this one.
That's so powerful. It just doesn't, like, my eyes can't read that as a SQL query.
Yeah, it's sort of, I mean, if you, from a .NET point of view, I'm using Link. Link uses like almost like this, but a bit more. Link looks a lot more like JPQL. If you want to, but you can do your little chaining as well like this. But yeah, it is like this. If it's not very natural, you're not
visible. Also, my eyes don't focus on the core content of the query.
Yeah. So if you want to do the same thing here, we would do an and. So lazy. It's like JPQL. Link is more like JPQL, but instead of it being a string, it's actual words. You just type it in. Your from is a keyword in it and all that. You don't have to do like link dot from. You just do a from. Cool. All right, so yeah. So looking at our, so we're doing the same query as above. I'm actually selecting an employee here, not the employee name.
Pilot can't even actually give us the correct criteria query. Never going to get generics. Never going to happen.
Java 9.
Never going to, not even Java 9, not even 10, none of this.
Okay, so we can do an and as well. So the default is an and. So we can just say this is equal to a new array list of predicates. Then we can just go and add this in. So this is if you're going to dynamically build up. So doing a lot of dynamic queries is sort of one of the use cases for criteria queries. So instead of doing string manipulations like you would do with JPQL, you're actually using actual objects here, which is safer if you don't have a lot of tests around these things. So let's go to and list.add. We can add our predicates, a QA department, and list.add. We can do our salary. So when you do our where, we can just pass our list in here, but that would be too easy to just pass the list in there. So this takes a array or a perimeter list of it, so we have to get this to an array. So you can do an AND list dot to array. This is one of my favorites of Java, is I need to go and tell it what type of array it's going to be.
Oh, we don't trust you.
Yeah, so it's a new predicate array, 0.
With method functions, you can actually, you don't need that anymore. Java 8. You can just go array colon new, and it'll do that for you.
Colon.
So that's going to freak people out. When it's got colon.
It's like, why is there C++ in the Java code? Okay, so you can do it like that if we just actually passed it in. So instead of actually building it up, if we just put it in as QA department and salary, that would have also done an AND for us. It's much shorter, but I had to show the other way of doing it. You can do it that way as well. So if we actually want to use parameters, so doing our dot notation, doing parameters like that, so everything is sort of set up here. I just have to do my where. So first off, actually you have to create a parameter expression. Parameter expression. At the top, so our department name is a string. Let's call it name. We're going to do from our criteria builder, so we want a parameter. There's two ways. You can either just give it the class type, which is string.class, and you can name it. I wonder if you can probably do for positional ones then. If you can just don't have to give it a name. That's homework. And see what happens if you don't give it a name. I'm going to call it name. So when we do our where clause, so I just want to type where. Our where on there. Actually, I'm going to do this different. I'm going to chain this onto the end. So you do a chain on there where, and we want to do a equals. So criteria builder dot equals get our path, so it's employee root dot get department dot get name must be equal to, and here we just pass in our parameter like so. So previously we would have put the actual string in there. Now we just pass our parameter type in there. We set our parameter. That's going to do all that for us. So if we actually go and run all these queries, they should just work. So you can see there's our 4 employees that work in the QA department. These are employees which either work in the QA department or have a salary bigger than 55,000. Here's an employee that works in the QA department and has a salary bigger or equal to 55,000, and then here's our one who uses our parameter, all the guys who work in the QA department again. All right, so looking at the criteria query, the main thing is you need to go and actually write criteria queries to get around it, to get into what happens here. You also do your case expressions, like of JPQL. You use a select case when otherwise, so it'll chain it together like that. And you've also got a coalesce function, which you can use as well.
Sorry, what?
Coalesce. So that's your, whichever first one in the list that isn't null, return that for me. So it's null checks. So if you.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Select one from. Yeah, okay.
There's a coalesce null SQL as well. It's part of JPQL. There's a if null function as well. All right, so you can either just use a straight coalesce like that, or you can use a value method. Actually, forgot to put a little example in here. But anyway, you can do that. I'm not going to do a demo for that. Then you can also do your order by and group bys. So your order by is sort of like your where clause. So you can't just do order by and just pass the path in there. Actually, you have to use your ascending or descending methods. That's going to return the correct. I think it returns a predicate. No, it won't. I'll return a predicate. So return that back for you. And you can also pass in a list of these OKs. Your group by and having clause, you can use your path expressions. So like a group by, pass in the path expression, and having, you can use your aggregates and all that type of stuff. Normal predicates that you'd use in your where clause. So this one is sort of grouping by employee, returning all the employees that have that work on more than one project, so 2 or more. So we're going to look at that demo. by work. So what we're going to do is going to select all employees and order them by the employee's name in a descending order. I feel like chaining again. Let's chain this one. We can do an order by. Like I said, this returns an order or a list of orders, and so you can't just go and say employee root dot get and the name there, because that would be too easy. It's actually sort of an override for that. So you have to go and actually do a criteria builder dot descending and pass in the path that you want to. So you can see if we've got our expression there, which is a path, and that'll be our employee root dot get, and we want to say we want to do it by name. So it's going to order it by name for us. Looking at our group bys and havings. So yeah, I'm just showing that we're doing a tuple. So criteria query is a tuple type, so I'm doing a create tuple query. And then select, oh, I'm not so select multi-select. All right, so first one is, unlike the other queries, we're selecting more than one little method here. So we can do a criteria query, dot, instead of doing a select, we can do a select, but then we have to do a criteria builder dot tuple here. We can do a multi-select. So multi-select. And then the two things we want to select, so we're going to select our departments and we want to select our count of those employees in those departments. So using our employee root dot get department, and we want to get the count of those. So criteria builder dot count what do we want to count? We want to count our employees. That's what we're going to select. So that's our first part there, doing a multi-select, returning those things. I'm going to do a group by. We can chain this onto the back as well, but it's all scrolling a bit far there. So I'm going to do a group by. We can just do our path expression, so we're going to group by our departments. So let's just do employee.root.group by department. Same thing you're doing there. And if we then go and run this, hopefully work, you can see there's our first one, ordering our employees in a descending order by name. The second one is actually returning at our departments and the number of employees in there. Good stuff. So now the really cool part of today, the meta model API. So getting back to our criteria query, you can also use the meta model. So first of, what is a meta model for those of us that didn't do computer science? So a meta model is a model of a model. So it's sort of describes how a model would work. So the meta model of an ERD diagram is that you've got tables and you've got relationships. So that's the meta model of that. So it sort of tells you how it's made up, the information about it. So getting back to our criteria query, that'll be getting information of how our entities are built up. So instead of using strings, we can use objects. Rory, you look confused.
I'm just thinking how dangerous this is.
Yeah, so you can get your meta model, either from your entity manager or from your roots. You can do a get model there. And that returns a meta model interface. And then from there you can get your entities and your embeddables and your managed types and all that type of stuff. And then what you can do with those objects, as we did with our gets and our joins, where we actually put a string in, like a get name and join projects. Instead of putting the string in there, you can put the actual object in there. So it's almost like constants. Yeah, so it's like string constants, if you want to think about that like that one. So pretty much anywhere that you can pass in that string, you're going to have this type, and that sort of say it makes it more strongly typed. I just think it makes you type more. So I don't think anywhere you'll actually see somebody using the meta model directly. It'll probably be if you're writing some sort of your own JPA provider in a way, maybe. You might use it like that, or some sort of boilerplate generating code. you probably use it for something like that, where things where you might not know what the types are ahead of time. So it's almost like reflection on entities. So two things to think about it. It's like a string constant for your different things, and it's like reflection. That's what we're going to be doing with these meta models. But like I said, nobody's actually going to do that directly. So then they've got this fancy one. It's actually part of the spec, your canonical meta model. It's a fancy word to throw around in the office. It's like the word of the day, canonical. So what it actually means is instead of you going and getting your own meta model out and using that, you're going to ask your provider, this should be a lowercase model, you should ask your provider to go and generate this for you. So what it does is then for every entity class in your persistent context, you're going to get another static class which is going to have all these little fields in there. And for the exam, you're going to need to know how this works. If you get an entity class, what type of static meta model it's going to generate for you. And it's really quite simple. For every field or attribute in there, you can have either a singular attribute, which means it's a single type, an integer, a string, or a department. You're going to have a collection attribute or a map attribute. And the way that works is that your first type in your generic is your actual entity type, employee in this case, and then your second type there is whatever type your field is. So if it's a integer, it's going to be integer ID. If it's another entity, it's going to be employee department. If it's something like a collection, it's going to be whatever collection. If it's the map, it's going to be what your map, your key, and your value is going to be. So it's actually quite simple. Not too much difficulty about that. And the way you use it then is, instead of having something like your department.getEmployees there, you'll have a department underscore dot employees. Like I said, so it's almost like a string constant it's giving you there. So when it comes to generating these canonical models, why don't I do all this as uppercase? So that comes from like duplicate slide. Is that the specification doesn't necessarily say how these need to be generated, just that they need to be generated, and then it should be one for each of those entities, and then I use that singular attribute, collection attribute, map attributes, and all that. So I said this can be dangerous. Forget to go and regenerate these things. It also just adds an extra step in your build process for somebody to get started. So you're either going to have to check these generated classes in, and it's never really a good idea if you have to check in generated code, but I mean, you can do that. Your Maven and Ant scripts, you can actually have, you think you've got lifecycle events for Maven on that. Ant, you've got stuff. And because you can do it in Maven and Ant, you can do it in Groovy. Gradle. Using Groovy.
Yeah, Gradle uses Groovy.
Gradle. There you go. That's what happens when you add things in the morning before. So you can also have your, instead of using Maven and Ant, you can also have your IDEs generated. So if you want to see how your IDE generated, go and look for annotation annotation processes. We're going to let that sink in. Annotation processes. So it actually is going to look at your annotations and process them.
Isn't it pre-processes?
I think it's processes.
No, I think it's pre-processes.
Let's see here. Where's my menu? Is it pre-processor or processes? It's processes, man. Let's say, making me doubt myself. Yeah, so looking at, like, I couldn't get this to work with Eclipse. I don't know. Well, I spent 5 minutes on it, but so generally, let's just go one down. So the way that it'll be is you'll actually enable it, set which path it's going to go to, and then set your processor. I have to go out of presentation mode to show this. So you're going to set that up. So I'm not going to spend too much time. I'm just sort of running out of time for this because I need to do the other thing.
So dangerous.
So I said if you meta model, so what you'll get is you'll get a meta model interface. You'll either get this from your entity manager, get meta model, and then from that you can get your entity types, the type of, let's say, employee. You'll get that from your meta model. Get entity. get entities. I can't remember. I'll set it up for in the Git repository. So this last thing I want to show is how it actually uses. So I've actually already set this up, so it's been generated. So you can see sort of our department one is sort of generated the same type of structure. We've got a single attribute or a set attribute or something like that, employee, that type of stuff. So what we'll then do is if we actually want to use this, if you're looking at here, we're sort of looking at our department and our name and so on. Instead of using department and name there, we can actually do a get, and then we can say from our employee underscore dot department. And we can actually do a, we're going to get the name from there, so it'll be department underscore dot name. You can do it like that, so that's sort of like a shortcut or a string constant for your type of stuff. So I'll update these before I push it to Git, so it's all updated. So the last thing you want to look at is just your Java persistence and using it in a container. So you sort of looked at this, and I sort of did this when we looked at entity managers. Just a quick refresher on this. You're going to need to know how to inject your entity managers into that, so that's using your persistent context annotation. So if you haven't looked at EJBs before, and injection and so on, go and read chapter 3 in the JPA 2 book. So you're going to use a persistent context to inject your entity manager into your bean or your servlet. And they come in two flavors, transaction and extended. So you can set your persistent context type, it's either extended or not. So extended one's what you're going to use with your stateful session beans. And then you can also do application managed ones. So use your persistent unit annotation and actually inject an entity manager factory in there. And then from there you'll use it the same way you'd use your normal SE ones. And if you go and look at the Git repository, there's one we did for the entity manager demo. So just looking at the few different ones. So looking at a normal one, you'll inject your entity manager with your persistent context. Like I said, that entity manager is your door into your persistent context. Tell it what name you need, and then from there you just use it like you use any manager. You can also do an extended one, like I say on a stateful session bean. You can do an extended one there, which just pretty much means instead of using your container managed transactions, you're going to kind of tell it when to. It's only going to commit once your stateful session beans remove method is called. It's going to commit it then. And then you can also do a persistent unit and get your entity manager in. And then from entity manager, go and create your entity, from entity manager factory, go and create your entity manager. And the only other difference really is that you're going to inject your data source. So instead of doing it like we did here, we actually give it a property, the driver, the host, all that type of stuff. We just use our Jindy data source and just inject it like that. So that's it. So for Java persistence in containers, you need to know your transaction types or your entity manager types, how to get them in. So, there are questions? Any questions? No questions? Rory, any questions? Donald, any questions?
Caveats. Meta model looks dangerous.
Yeah, it's, you know, they sort of say it's for more type safety, but in this day and age, you should probably have tests around these things anyway. So, I mean, once you've
about generating WSDLs. So, like, you know, you have to generate WSDLs, and then you check the WSDLs in, and you forget to run a Maven lifecycle, and it doesn't generate them fine. You deploy it, then someone goes, but that attribute was supposed to be there, and you have to work out on what lifecycle Maven didn't actually generate the WSDLs.
Yeah, so with this one, if you're going to change your criteria query, it'll probably break. Don't regenerate it. But you know, so I mean, it's a lot of extra gump you're putting around your build process.
Might not have access to the underlying code. You might not even know what it looks like.
Who cares what it looks like?
You can actually interrogate it like reflection.
Yeah.
Selects on it.
But like, why? You've still got your entity. You know, and your entity should reflect what's happening in your table.
Not have your entity.
What?
Not have your entity. You might actually.
But then you can go entity dot and see what they are. I mean, the only time you're going to really need to know this is if you want to be fancy that way. But the only thing is, if you, instead of going and writing some sort of boilerplating code the whole time, you might sort of generate it more with this because you're using objects. So, but I mean, you can use strings as well. But anyway, I think it's sort of whichever flavor fits you, and it's sort of string constants. So, in essence, the string constants coupled with reflection in a way that's generated for you. But I've never really seen. Whenever I've seen code like that, where people are using sort of string constants instead of the actual strings, it's crap. It's
the ego.
Yeah, it just makes things, because you get another one and you want to use it, then you just need one guy to be like, stuff these constants. I'm just going to put my string directly in there. That also sounds so dirty. I'm just going to put my string. Just going to use a string. I'm not going to put it. I'm just going to use my string. Then that all those wheels comes off, and then the next guy doesn't update the constants, and then a year down the line, somebody's like, "Why are we using these constants?"
I noticed that also. So some people start with JPQL, get the hell in, and then they go native query,
Yeah.
and then no one touches JPQL after that.
Yeah. So it's all that. So for this week, please, people, go and write the review exam. It'll mostly be around these criteria query builders, and there are questions about using it in servlets and containers. There's no flush mode questions. So there'll be a lot of questions about, this is the scenario, what would my criteria query look like? Next week, we're looking at transaction management and concurrency and locking. So it's very much looking at EJBs again, and container managed and bean managed transactions, and then locking and concurrency. So go and read that. So it's the second last week. Should be our third last review. So I think next week's one won't be as long as this week. Yeah, and the attendance keyword. We're going to stop the YouTube video here or not?
Sandela needs to dial in now.
Sandela hasn't dialed in.
Yeah, quickly tell.
Okay, so the word is criteria. I hope I spelled it right. Criteria. Rihanna song. It's hysteria.
She's an artist. Don't mock her.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, everybody, go and have breakfast. India, go and have lunch.
My sugar level was quite.
Cheers.